Aaron Rodgers. How did you feel about his presser?
Yeah, I love first off, Tom Pelissero just asked a great question, like probably the most open-ended question, so that he basically just said like, explain yourself and like tell us everything you want to say. So shout out to him for just asking a great question. Um, I thought he was very just honest about the whole situation, and um, well, I think his main thing was he wasn't a part of it's not about the money, right? He said that time and time again. It's just more of he wants to be part of the recruiting process. He wants to be more involved with personnel decisions, and this all came back to, and we kind of memed it earlier, was Jake Kumaro and how I want to say it was Schefter or Rappaport or maybe Demovsky, but someone said when the Packers cut,
I think it was Schefter.
I think it was too. He basically said when Jake Kumaro was cut, that's when that was like the end of it. Like there was no going back. That was a line that was crossed. And he talked about that today a little bit, and he said he wants to be more part of the team decisions, and they cut Kumaro when Rodgers thought he was the second best receiver in camp. And I thought the best part was when he said, basically the front office has been just disrespectful to veterans and people that should get more praise. And he listed like 10 dudes. He said like James Jones, Charles Woodson, Julius Peppers, Clay Matthews, John Kuhn, Jordy Nelson. There's a few more I'm missing in there. Charles Woodson.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, like, the other thing is that the Packers are a very old school organization in the fact that, I mean, Ron Wolf is still involved. They're a very, very draft develop organization, and they believe in moving on from players and drafting new ones to replace them. So they get rid of their veterans 1 year too early rather than 1 year too late and replace them with young players that they draft. They've done it in their secondary for years. They did it with Clay Matthews very recently. And drafting Rashawn Gary, that's just what they do. And another quick side thing, just because I think it's always funny, Jake Kumaro is Nick Bosa's first cousin.
Really?
Yeah. Nick Bosa's mom's brother's son is Jake Kumaro.
Jeez, yeah. I mean, it's a football family of greatness. You got the two Bosas, you got
Kumaro.
Yeah. Touchdown Jesus, as some call him. But yeah, I think the thing with the veterans was basically the fact that they either got no offer or they got really lowballed hard. I want to say Jordy was given like they offered him like a minimum contract after he was making like a lot, like over 10 million a year. So that I understand, and I think everyone understands where Rodgers is coming from. And it's more about wanting to be a part of the personnel and getting people to come and, when they're recruiting free agents saying, hey, like you get to come play with me. And that is one of the biggest like factors in going to Green Bay is, you're competing for a championship. That's been the drive this past decade and how they've got people. So I really think the FO or the front office is they have to make a decision, right? They either need to cave into what Rodgers is saying. They already did with his new contract and that he has more flexibility, but I really think this is going to be a big moment for them in how they go about their future with Mark Murphy and then Brian Gutekunst, the GM, and how they want to run the operations. Do they take this and say we can't be in like this bad light like this anymore and sort of change up what we're doing, or will they continue with Clay Matthews, one of the best edge rushers we've had in our organization, and they don't really give him a proper farewell tour, and they kind of just say, thanks for your time, see ya. What will they do? That's what I'm interested to kind of see in the near future.
Yeah. And there's a lot to unpack. I really like everything you said. I agreed with all of it. And I do agree with your final conclusion too, that it's a turning point. And I do want to say that Mark Murphy's comments this entire offseason, I don't think leave the Packers in any type of place to tell you that things are changing anytime soon. Yeah. I think Mark Murphy has actually been, frankly, a little bit disrespectful to Aaron Rodgers with his comments this entire offseason. To touch on his press conference, to me, the most important takeaway from his presser, and I think it should be the broadest takeaway, is it's quite simple to me. He was not angered by the Jordan Love pick that much. I think Aaron Rodgers shows you that he's enough of a professional within this business that he understood why they took Jordan Love. He was more angered by the fact that he doesn't get to be involved in any sort of discussion for what they do as a quarterback. And to me, that makes no sense. Like when you have a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers, like, sure, I'm going to ask you who you prefer throwing the football to because we're probably winning games because of you. And to me, that's really the most important point. Like, I think it doesn't get talked about enough, right? Right here, Red and Gold said that Brady's willing to pay for more money than Rodgers so their team can build a complete roster. And I think that's fair, and I think it's a good point. And history and data tells you it's a good point. But if you're Aaron Rodgers, you're probably sitting there saying, well, if you keep Jake Kumerow and he's on the field instead of Marcus Valdez-Scantling and Equanimous St. Brown against the Bucks, we're likely winning. That's probably the way he looks at it, right? And you might not look at Jake Kumerow as that much of a difference maker. I definitely don't look at him as that much of a difference maker, but you can point to enough personnel blunders that the Packers have made over the years where they could have won if they just did X, Y, and Z, even with Rodgers making that much money. They just refused to do it, right?
Kind of. I mean, you could say that about every team in the league.
That's fair.
And
that's fair.
I mean, this kind of brings me to another point that, like, we haven't talked about here, but the whole Rodgers has no support. I understand the defensive aspect. The defense has let him down a lot, but you can't tell me that they haven't had a top 5 O-line for the majority of his career. They've surrounded him with talented receivers. Like, I feel like they, at least on the offensive side, like, they've surrounded him with talent. Greg Jennings, Randall Cobb, Jordy Nelson, James Jones, Jermichael
and the scheme argument. Like, the scheme argument was relevant with Mike McCarthy. They have a groundbreaking scheme. Like, what Matt LaFleur and him did last year, all the RPOs, everything they did where they took the Shanahan offense and gave Rodgers the leeway he wanted at the line of scrimmage was groundbreaking. It was they were amazing.
It's very friendly too.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah, so I agree with all of that. I think my biggest thing with the Rodgers doesn't have enough help. It's not that he doesn't have enough help, right? It's not like they're a playoff team every year because of Aaron Rodgers. He has a big part to do with it, but they also have a playoff roster around him. I think when people say Rodgers doesn't have enough help, I think they're pointing to those one or two things that they lack, to get them over the top to the Super Bowl. Maybe when you're 15-1 and Aaron Rodgers has the single greatest quarterback season ever, you don't have the 32nd ranked defense in the NFL. Yeah. Oh, wait, you do. And you drop 5 passes in the divisional round, and now you're losing to the 10-6 New York Giants with Eli Manning. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, they're definitely there's definitely spots where they could have been more aggressive. And
right.
They could have, I guess, to relate it to the Patriots. They traded a 2nd-round pick to get Mohamed Sanu from the Falcons because they knew their receiving corps wasn't good. Mohamed Sanu
for Brandon Cooks.
Yeah, they traded a first for Cooks. They made moves to win now. The Packers have not really ever had that mentality. They've kind of always been preparing for 2 to 3 years down the road.
Yeah.
And there is a level of
organization.
There is a level of doing that. There definitely is a level of you want to have sustained success, but I mean there comes a point where you just gotta say what we're doing isn't working. We need to try something else, whether that's firing the coach, maybe being more aggressive, maybe drafting for the present instead of 3 years down the line. There definitely is an argument to be made there. And I think you brought up the point. Rodgers said it himself. This has nothing to do with the draft last year. I mean, after how he played, I don't think he was worried about losing his job to any rookie. Whether that rookie is Trevor Lawrence or Zach Wilson, he really could not have played much better. It was video game numbers, 48-5. That is unprecedented. So yeah, I don't think he's really worried about his own performance. More about the way the organization wants to go.
Yeah, 100%. And just to touch on it, right? And I feel like there's a lot of unnecessary scrutiny on Jordan Love. To this day, I actually don't think drafting Jordan Love at the point they did was a bad draft pick. Now, do I agree with trading up for him? That's the part that gets me. But I had no problems with them drafting Jordan Love. Sure, you have Aaron Rodgers, but he's already 38 years old. At that point, he had played 16 seasons in the NFL. He did not play particularly well relative to his standards. He was still a top 2 or 3 quarterback in the NFL, but 2019 was definitely a step down from what we're used to seeing. So I understand the thought process. Okay, let's try to get a developmental prospect with a ton of physical talent and get him ready in a good system in 2 years. So I didn't have a problem with that thought process.
Yeah.
But I do agree with Aaron Rodgers when he says that he should be more involved. And I don't know why Jake Kumerow is the example. I wish there was a stronger example. Like, I fought the table for us to draft, and I sat there and said, we must draft, player X who turned out to be an all-pro, or we need to sign player Y who turned out to be an all-pro. Because, Jake Kumerow feels a little bit like, you're arguing over somebody who might be impactful, not discrediting Jake Kumerow is, what did you call him? Jesus?
Touchdown Jesus.
Touchdown Jesus. I'm just saying that he might not be possibly the most influential player on a season, but I totally get where he's coming from that standpoint. Because to me, especially in an organization without an owner, even the GM, like, I don't know why Gutekunst has. To me, LaFleur and Rodgers should be the most powerful people in that organization, other than pulling off the genius move of trading down, allowing the Saints to take Marcus Davenport, and then trading back up to take Jair Alexander. I've not been too convinced by any of the things Gutekunst's done. Like, he signed Zadarius Smith, good signing. I think most people agreed he was the premier pass rusher in that market, in the 2019 market, that was, going to be just signed, like the D Fords, the Frank Clarks, who had to sign and trade for. On the other hand, he also signed Preston Smith, who, in spite of having a really great season in 19, he was pretty poor for the Packers in 20. If you get away from the numbers and look at what he actually did. So that, to me, cancels itself out. He picked Jair Alexander, but then he also picked Josh Jackson. Kevin King, to me, is an okay player. You get a starter from a 30th overall pick. That's fine to me. But you just go down the list. I think trading up for Darnell Savage, I know a lot of people are really bullish on his potential because he makes big plays, but he also makes a lot of mistakes, in my opinion. Especially his tackling. His tackling is poor. But then, the Amos signing was
Billy Turner signing was amazing as well.
The Billy Turner signing was excellent. The Amos signing was excellent. So, I wouldn't say he's done poorly by any means, but to me, what LaFleur achieved, when you look at schematically what the Packers were doing on offense last year, and then you talk about video game numbers. Aaron Rodgers had one of the greatest quarterback seasons ever, which is crazy because he has 3 of the greatest quarterback seasons ever. If you look at the greatest quarterback seasons ever and you look at his individual seasons. So because of that, to me, those guys maybe should have a little more of a say, and there should be a little more, at least, open discourse, open communication, rather than Gutekunst given the power to make all the decisions. So from that standpoint, I do agree with Aaron Rodgers.
And I know he mentioned Jordy Nelson and Cobb, and I think the Jordy Nelson thing hurt him a lot too, because if you remember that, so the season after Jordy Nelson got cut, or during the season, they were 4-1 with Rodgers. Jordy was playing fine. He goes down. Hundley comes in. Jordy just
disappears.
Pretty much, yeah. And they cut Jordy and used that money to sign Jimmy Graham, who was just a colossal failure of a signing. That type of thing definitely irked him. And then seeing Cobb go, he mentioned guys that were strong leaders and good locker room presence that maybe, sure, you could argue were potentially overpaid, but they're good to have on the team for just more than what they do on the field. He really harped on that. And I think that is important. And I think the locker room now is being kind of embracing this sort of quote-unquote last dance idea, which is, I'd say overall, I think it's a good thing. We can maybe talk about that another time when the season starts. But it seems like Rodgers does value the, just a locker room presence more than, say, always on-field production. Maybe that's what he saw in Kumerow. And then my last thing, too, was the 2015 draft for the Packers. You might not know about this, but this draft was not good by any stretch of the imagination and really set us back, I think, a year. I could just tell you who we drafted. First round, Randall, then Quentin Rollins, then Ty Montgomery.
Oh, I remember this draft.
Then Jake Ryan, Brett Hundley, Aaron Ripkowski, and then a bunch of other people that didn't make the roster. The best player from that was Demarius Randall. and he eventually got traded. So like that, I feel like that draft really just set us back a couple years.
Yeah, but every team has drafts like that.
Yeah.
I did want to touch on two things before we end. I think we will talk about the last dance thing in the Packers and why it's a good thing for their season at some point. Maybe even today, if time permits, we'll talk about it. And I think the most important thing is I actually think it's a good thing that Aaron Rodgers was so open, out front, and honest about this situation. There's no hidden agendas. There's no reporters reporting this, but Aaron Rodgers says this in a presser. He said exactly how he feels. That was consistent for the most part with the reporting that Schefter and all of them have provided over the last 3 months. And now that everybody's aware of it, they can now just go and move on and look to focus on their season, because Rodgers is clearly focused on football and trying to win a Super Bowl this year, and everybody else can be too, because this is not looming over. Everybody knows the actual truth because Rodgers just came out and said it. And the other thing is, and this is just a small personal detail before we end, if people want a little bit of insight into some of Blake and I's conversations, he brought up the Jordy Nelson year, the Brett Hundley year, the year they cut Jordy Nelson. That was our senior year of high school. And he and I used to argue just about every single day on who was a better wide receiver between Jordy Nelson and Davante Adams. I was still married to Jordy Nelson at the time, especially based on his production. I wasn't really buying into the Davante Adams hype train. Blake was all over it, and we used to argue about that. So just a funny little insight. Blake ended up being right. Davante Adams was really maybe even better than he thought he would end up being. But yeah.
A lot better than I thought. If you remember, his rookie year, he was pretty good. He had the great game against the Patriots, but his second year when Jordy tore his ACL in 2015,
everything was awful for them.
People called him Drop Vontae. That's what people called him. And he had a lot of drops, and he had a sophomore year slump. He had a bad ankle, but he was pretty rough that year. And then
he struggled to separate.
Yeah. And then with Hundley, he kind of took off for whatever reason. I don't know.
Yeah, they were an all-time great duo. I'll always look back at the Antonio Brown game on Sunday night that season when, the Packers played really well. They forced turnovers and put their offense in very fortuitous situations before Antonio Brown ended their season with 2 ridiculous catches ended that game. And Chris Collinsworth said, well, man, I don't think Aaron Rodgers could have played any better than Brett Hundley. And that was my cue to just turn off the TV. Because if they played that specific game with Aaron Rodgers, they would have won by 25.
Yeah, I mean, there was a famous clip in the game where it was like Jordy Nelson running down one of the sidelines like wide open and just like Brett Hundley completely missing him. I still remember that image to this day. But that was a crazy game, though. That was one of Antonio Brown's like I guess Kodak moments with that sideline catch that he somehow got in.
Yeah, for sure.